Hello, beautiful light-filled souls. Trisha Barker here. I'm excited to talk with Dr. Jan Holden today about induced after-death communication. Dr. Jan Holden is the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, and she's also the editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies. She's a counselor, a former professor at the University of North Texas, and she is a fascinating storyteller about all the research and all the amazing experiences that people are having with this therapy. So, thanks to those of you who've signed up personally for a reading or healing with me. I always love meeting people in community, and I love your comments and appreciate your support. So, let's dive in. So tell me, Jan, this is a special IANDS conference that we have coming up. Anything you want to say about your connection to Dr. Raymond Moody and the conference as a whole?
Well, yeah, and like you said, this is a special one because we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of his book, the publication of his book, Life After Life. And that really is credited with opening the formal field of near-death studies. So it's like 50 years of the field of near-death studies. And he'll be there in person. And there's a really great film that Paul Perry has done on him, kind of a retrospective, and we've just got a lot of stuff planned. It's really great.
And you have a section that you'll be leading about after-death communication. Isn't that correct? So you're really kind of bringing this to the public at IANDS.
That's right. Yeah, actually, two panels. One of them is my work with the University of Virginia research group on veridical after-death communication, which means that during the ADC, the person received information that they couldn't have known through normal means, but turns out to be correct. And so people have like found lost documents and hidden guns and just all kinds of interesting things. And we're trying to collect these stories and compile them. So that's what one of the panels is about. And then the other one is about, as you mentioned, induced after-death communication and an update because there's been quite a bit of research on it just in the past couple of years and showing its profound effectiveness. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to do an update, of that where we are now with that
Yeah,
counseling
so
technique.
tell me, this is my understanding of the difference between and where the therapy might be more helpful than a mediumship reading. A lot of times people are so traumatized by the loss of a loved one that induced after-death communication might be the way to go to help them with that trauma and help them connect to the other side or have a verification. But could you just, for like the beginners out there or the people who've never heard of it, kind of give an overview of what it is, how it helps people connect, and the basics?
Sure, sure. Well, and you're right. I mean, it's for people who are grieving the loss of a loved one. And so far, we've worked only with adults. And the counseling approach is normally two 90-minute sessions. And in the first session, we get to know the client, their relationship with their deceased loved one, and all of that. And then we identify what we call the core sadness. Like we ask the client to help us, we work together to identify what is the single worst aspect of the grief. So we have this little phrase that we go to the worst first. And once they've identified what the worst is, and usually they can encapsulate it in a word or a phrase, then we do bilateral stimulation, and that is repeated uh, stimulation, right, left of the body in some way. Now, it could be through vision, looking right and left. It could be through sound. But what we do right now is tapping If I'm with a person in person, I tap the backs of their hands. And then if we're doing video counseling, they actually tap themselves right and left. And interestingly, that seems to work as well as when the counselor's doing it. A set, what we call a set of bilateral stimulation, about 20 sets of taps. And then the person closes their eyes, and whatever's happening inside, when they open their eyes, they report it to the counselor and then talk about it a little bit and then start wherever they left off and do more tapping and more eyes closed, more processing. And what happens is at the beginning, when we've identified what that worst part is, we ask them to scale from 1 low to 10 high. How bad is your grief, your discomfort, your distress around this when you think of that worst thing? Usually they say like 8, 9, 10. After we do several sets of, usually it's several sets, sometimes it's only one, sometimes it's 7, they'll get to a place where something shifts and it's kind of magical. We don't really know exactly how this works, but somehow something shifts. And suddenly what was so painful becomes like neutral. And how painful is it now when they think of that thing? They'll say 0, 1, or 2. And at that point, we just start with that and do another set of bilateral stimulation. And about 50% of people spontaneously have an after-death communication experience. Now, it could be visual, it could be auditory, it could be a felt, something physical, felt sense. It could be something in imagery, but some sense of connectedness to the deceased loved one. And usually this is accompanied by a lot of tears of like joy and gratitude and stuff like that. And then for the other 50%, we'll ask the question, if you could say only one thing to your deceased loved one, what's the single most important thing you'd want to say to them? And as they think of that, we do another set of bilateral stimulation, and another about 30% have an ADC at that point. About 20% of people don't have an ADC, and usually it's because something is blocking them. There still might be some painful aspect of their grief that needs to be resolved, or there might be regret or guilt or anger or something, some emotional thing that puts them off balance. And in order to have ADC, a person needs to be in what we think in this kind of psychospiritual state of equanimity, invitation, reception, no grasping, no like debilitating skepticism. Some skepticism actually is fine. And that's when the experience occurs. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I get that. And it sounds like during the pandemic I did some more EMDR, and so that was the that was the
Yeah,
way that they
right.
use that to release trauma. It's very effective.
Yes, it's really EMDR is very effective for trauma. And IADC is based on EMDR, but we've deviated from it. So we no longer say that we're using EMDR. We talk about using bilateral stimulation. But
Interesting.
they're very related. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just makes so much sense to me that certain people need that. So I know you get into the research of everything, and I love your stories. What do you know about spontaneous after-death communication? Like, what has the research showed us?
Well, for spontaneous ADC, we know that it's an equal opportunity experience, that both men and women report it, but women more often than men. Young and old report it, older more often than young, but probably just because the older you get, the more dead people you know. And that some some cultures are very ADC friendly, and it's reported more in those cultures like Iceland and Hispanic culture. And reported less, but still reported in cultures that are not so ADC friendly, like US, Western culture. So, and that we know that it's very healing, and that's why it's an important component of IADC, because it has this healing property that people feel comforted, reconnected, reassured that their loved one is well, and that they're still in contact, and that they're going to see them again someday, and that the relationship is ongoing, and that fits the prevailing view of healthy grieving, is about continuing emotional bond with the deceased loved one. The relationship has changed, but it hasn't ended. And so this just reinforces that. And also, we know that people who have after death communication experiences, living people, if they already believed in an afterlife, this experience reinforces it. If they didn't, it meant most people shift toward believing in an afterlife because they've had actual communication with their deceased loved one. Feels absolutely real in the vast majority of cases. And as our veridical research is showing, it is even objectively real sometimes.
Oh,
So,
wow,
yeah.
that's really cool to hear. And from my perspective, I love it. There's connections to mediumship. When I was on Dr. Oz and they, focused on the mediumship stuff, all my Hispanic students, well, at TCC and Trinity River, we have 60%
Mm,
female students who are
okay.
Hispanic, and they all wanted a medium reading. I was hearing all these grandmothers coming through. Tell my granddaughter she can do this herself. And I was like, okay, I will. And
Yeah.
so there is this, just love for the dead and honor of the dead with Day of the Dead. And
Yeah.
different cultures are a lot more open. And so there's more reporting probably of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And something you said there reminded me of something else I wanted to say, but it slipped out of my mind. I'll probably remember it. Oh, I know. One of the things that I would like to do is a study comparing the relative benefits of IADC versus mediumship. And I suspect that certainly for the 20% of people who can't have an IADC experience, I think a mediumship experience would be potentially as helpful to them in their grief. And it would be interesting to see, even if somebody has an IADC experience, whether they might benefit a little more even from an additional mediumship reading, or vice versa. If they've done a mediumship reading, does it help them a little bit more to also have an IADC? I'd like to explore all of that, just the
Yeah, and
relative
even
benefits.
even workshops with mediums and other people in those situations. I know Helping Parents Heal is a great organization that connects people with mediums, but
Right.
we could go off on so many different tangents, but one thing that's different is there are the mediums who focus on the personality of the person, in their life. As a medium and a near-death experiencer, I start talking to the spirits about what they're doing now, over there.
Right.
And sometimes that's vastly different from, their personality. They'll tell me things or show me pictures about that life, but they move into this expanded consciousness where there's greater healing, forgiveness, all sorts of benefits.
Yeah, and I could see it being kind of a stage-wise thing, that for a sitter, it might be helpful first to do the personality stuff, which really confirms for them they're really in contact, and then find out about the nature of the afterlife. I mean, that to me is, yeah, absolutely the next big question.
Yeah, because their family, of course, over there is supporting them energetically in what they're doing here, but they often have these these interesting missions on the other side. Like if they were an architect here, they might be a guide to others, building buildings around the world, trying to see those ideas and with the knowledge they have over there. It's really fascinating,
It
just
is.
how
It
they
is.
continue their missions in a sense.
Yes, absolutely. That is really fascinating. Yeah. Yeah.
But so the mysterious experiences during induced after death communication, you have such good stories throughout my time of knowing you.
Yeah.
I'm always like, oh no, another good story from Dr. Holden.
Well,
So tell me some of these.
my probably my favorite, because I do have several from IADC, but probably my favorite is it happened in this room. This is my home office behind me, and you can see the double doors back there, and they're just on friction. You just pull, and it kind of snap, it clicks, and then the door just opens. So I was sitting here facing the door. My client was sitting here with her back to the door, so she was like kind of like behind where my head is right now. And she was one of the students who went with me to learn the IADC process from Al Botkin, who developed it. And the other two students were sitting on the things are backwards here on my couch over here. So she and I are facing each other, and and this was about her a relative who had died some years, about 10 years before, and she had never had an experience of communication with this relative. So we do the IADC thing. She has this profound experience. And so we're finished. We're just processing and winding down. And she says, it's like it's like a door has opened in my relationship with this deceased loved one. And I'm like, wow, something has really opened. And then she started to say something else. And this door that I'm pointing to right here popped open and slowly opened. And I've lived in this house now for 27 years. That door has never before or since opened spontaneously. It was only after she said, it feels like a door has opened in my relationship with my sister.
Wow.
And I've tested the door, and since then, and even like if you manually just detach it and then let go, it kind of swings open kind of fast. But it at that day it opened like very gradually, such that my jaw dropped. The two students over here, their jaws dropped. She saw our reaction, and she's what? And we pointed like, and she turns around in time to see the door opening. And
Wow.
so that was weird. And then what kind of an interesting uh, post note to that is when I was doing the study of IADC at the University of North Texas, we have in our counseling clinic what we call our control room. And it's a room with a table, and here there's a little screen that shows what's going on in every counseling room, so the supervisor can watch and tune in and that sort of thing. And behind me was the door, and that door was a lever kind of handle, and the door was closed. It was the last day of the study, and the clinic was completely empty. That's why we did it on Saturday, because they didn't use the clinic for anything else and we could have it to ourselves. Everybody was gone except the last two, the counselor and client. So I'm standing here watching, and because as soon as I see them stand up, I'm going to run over to the room and grab the client and bring her to the computer to do the post test. So I'm watching, 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 waiting for them to finish. It's going to be any minute now. And suddenly I hear this noise behind me, and I turn around, and the door opened and was doing this. And I'm like, okay, somehow this study, this research is going to open some kind of door. I don't know. I don't know what. But so that was really weird. And again, I was 31 years on the counseling faculty there. I was in this room. Well, we weren't there in that particular location that long, maybe 10 years. I'd done a lot of work in that room. Never had the door spontaneously opened, especially when I was in there alone, and it was interesting.
Yeah, I think we do so much online that we forget about the power of being in person and getting these
Yes.
these moments in real time. But I
Yeah.
know that spiritual energy is affected by other people, and that when you're together in a group, it is a little more profound because there's more
Yeah.
witnesses and there's a lot more energy going on.
Yeah, I really think that's true. And like you, I believe in the non-local nature of energy. We can be zip codes away and still be connected. And also, I do think that there is something unique about people gathering together, and that brings us right back to the IANDS conference because there's something in that conference. All these people who've had near-death experiences, a lot of people who've had related experiences like after-death communication, past life memories, out-of-body experiences, telepathy, all this kind of stuff. Um, Something about energetically being together. It's just like I'm buzzing by the end of the weekend. And almost everybody that I talk to says that there's like a grief following the conference. It's such a high. And then you go back to, this reality. It's kind of a letdown.
I
But
know,
but
I know. I've heard people
yeah.
say it's like you get to take a little bit of heaven into a space,
Yes.
that there's
Yeah.
enough of that energy of talking about it, remembering it together, that it really is
Yes.
beautiful. It,
It
it
is.
truly is.
It really is.
And then it also can be overwhelming to the highly sensitive too, to be
Yes.
around, like other people who are open. And so I always remind people like you can't overdo it there. You have to
Yeah.
take care of yourself, go outside, ground, take a
Right.
break, take a nap.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, it's such a benefit to have a room right in the conference hotel so you can retreat to your room for a little bit of get a little equanimity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But yeah, so I know, having referred a client to do this, that he was very blocked, but he was able to get, a couple of signs that came through, a song from a car that drove by, and another, really important sign to him. And then he too is, I think, dying of a broken heart from the loss of his wife. And so I think those signs are very healing, though. Is there is there anything you have studied around, like the research of grief and healing from
Mm.
this therapy?
Yeah, definitely. Well, of course, the study there have now been three studies. I did the first one at the University of North Texas, and we compared uh, IADC to traditional grief counseling and found that the people who went through two 90-minute sessions of traditional grief counseling either stayed the same or actually got a little worse, almost like it opened up the grief but didn't resolve it in any way. And whereas the IADC people significantly improved in their grief symptoms, and it was uh, for people who are statistically savvy, we had a very large treatment effect, which is unheard of for something that's just two 90-minute sessions. So we know that from objective measurements that people's grief symptoms reduce after IADC. And then there's since been a study in Italy and another one in Australia. Each of them, each of the studies has been a little different in the way it approached, but they all showed that IADC was powerfully healing for people. So there's just, and one of the things I say when I'm doing presentations or whatever on IADC is there are a lot of ways out there for people to facilitate after death communication in clients. I've heard different counselors talk about different approaches and that sort of thing. And that's all fine. It's just that as counselors, we're supposed to, as mental health professionals, we're supposed to use empirically supported. And this is the only approach that I know that has been researched and now researched so thoroughly to show its effectiveness. So it's not that other techniques might not work, but that somebody who wants to use this technique in their practice is wise to just get trained in IADC and use it. And it's just a weekend intensive training, so it's not really extensive or terribly expensive or anything like that. So it's very accessible for licensed mental health professionals who are interested in it.
And this is a question that just popped into my head right now. A lot of my clients are starting to come to me after losing a horse or a dog or a cat.
Mhm.
Has this been studied or tried with the grief of pets?
I'm trying to think if it has been, but whether it has been or not, there's no reason why it couldn't be.
Oh,
Absolutely.
oh, so you would
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
willing to do that with someone.
Yeah. Well, and I do know that pets have spontaneously shown up in IADC sessions. In fact, one of the examples that the founder of the guy who discovered IADC tells about is that this a veteran, that's who he was working with when he discovered this technique. This veteran, they did at that time he was using eye movement, and he did that. The guy closed his eyes, and then he like opened his eyes. He's like, oh, something's clawing at my neck. And so Al said, well, my experience is that if you can just find a way to stay with it, something's going to evolve out of it. So the guy's like, okay, so they do another set. He closes his eyes and he's like, and then, oh, oh, and then he bursts into this laughter and joy. And when he opened his eyes, he said he had been wanting to connect with a buddy who had died, in combat. And that guy had a set of dogs, like they were like Samoyeds or something. And in the ADC, he had them on a leash and they were ahead of him and they jumped up and they were like, doing this. And but it was friendly, they were like so excited to see him. And so they just showed up spontaneously. So I see no reason why it couldn't be pursued purposely with the loss of a pet.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. It makes sense to me that it would be possible. And so
Yeah.
if someone is in a remote area, can they find someone online or, if they're in a bigger city, is it easy to find someone
Yeah, it
therapist?
is. If someone's looking for an IADC therapist, generally speaking, if you're working with a therapist, they have to be in your state because the state licenses, and so you're licensed to work anywhere in the state. And so at the IADC website, I think it's induced-adc.com. And but if you just Google or do a search of the term induced after death communication, you'll get to the site and it's the right site. There's a tab there about trained therapists. And when you open that tab, they're organized by state. So you find your state, and then you can see a listing of everybody in your state who's been trained to do IADC. And you can find out if they um, do telehealth, where they can, if they don't live right near you, that they can do it via computer.
Yeah, that's great. And
Yeah.
what about overseas? Can people?
Well, yes, there are IADC people trained. I know in Italy, in Australia, and there might be others. So, but that they would, I think, all be listed at the IADC website.
Interesting, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my final question is really just how far has all of this research come, looking at, Dr. Moody's book and, your early days and interest in this? Are you glad you jumped into this? I mean,
Oh,
I bet you are in many ways.
absolutely. And it's come like leaps and bounds. In the beginning, there was the question, essentially, people were saying, now what? You know, and now people are saying, oh, near-death experience. It's like a household term, although not everybody knows really what it means. There's a lot of confusion between just a close brush with death versus a near-death experience, which is during the close brush with death a special state of consciousness, where the person perceives themselves outside their body and all that stuff. So there's still some education that needs to be happening, but we just know so much about NDEs, their after effects, and then all these related experiences. The research is really exploding, and the worldview that has dominated science for the past 100 years or so, that the basic premise is that the only things that are real are those that can be directly observed and measured and that sort of thing. Materialism is being seriously challenged by all of this research. And I really think that we're on the brink of a new um, order of humanity. I don't know that it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think eventually it's going to happen. And I don't know if you've uh, delved into the telepathy tapes at all, but that's so interesting that all these non-speaking children with autism are able to communicate with each other, and maybe what we all need to do is stop talking so we can connect at these higher levels that are so much more efficient and so connect so much more connected with each other.
I
So
totally believe that and understand that as a near-death experiencer. Like, I was so contained in my physical body, and then immediately afterwards, I really couldn't tell the difference between me in the room. Other people's thoughts would sometimes come in, but that oneness experience that a lot of near-death experiencers have, at the heart, we believe everyone's good, so I think it's often fear and manipulation and, like all sorts of things that could be dropped
yeah,
if we begin to just go, hey, let's give people the benefit of the doubt, let them heal and meet them where they are. I know that autistic children, even just a little bit on the spectrum, and I've worked with a lot of college students lately who are on the spectrum. I know that they start communicating with me a little bit before class and connecting with me. They feel safe with me because they know that I'm like, I'm going to help you. Don't worry about that. Just come in, be quiet. I'll come over and talk to you individually later, And so we start having these conversations, and they'll hang around afterwards too, not saying much, maybe just erasing the board or picking up things. And I know that they just want to share their appreciation, that
yeah,
they're understood or they feel safe with me since I
yeah,
communicate with them. And so I think the future is a lot of teachers and professors and people helping nonverbal children learn how to protect themselves, how to work with the energy, and how to move through this world in
yeah,
a
yeah,
protected way.
yeah. That is wonderful. That's so wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing that work. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's affirming because, why does everyone on the spectrum stay after, like and feel
Hmm.
safe? It's like to me, that's a verification,
Right. Yeah,
that
absolutely.
there are those
Abs-
little moments. And I think you're right. There is a change in the way humanity is evolving, and we've done enough to push this idea of, hey, consciousness is not local. It's really not just within the brain.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jan, for all you have done. Just for those of you who don't know, Dr. Jan Holden runs the IANDS. Well, she's the president of IANDS, but she also, I know you from the DFW area, and you pushed me forward in the early days when I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to tell my story publicly. I'll do it once. And then I just realized how much it helps people, the people who have gone through grief. I mean, I think they are the ones who are often searching out these stories, or the people who are afraid of death. And then it just became really a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm just thrilled to see the direction that you've taken in your life since that first interview we did years and years ago, which I still use when I'm doing an NDE 101. I still use excerpts from your interview to illustrate different points and everything. So we've been very beneficial to each other, and
Yeah.
I'm really thrilled with what you've done.
And to other near-death experiencers, I always want to say the researchers help you so much because I didn't know the value of certain parts of my story. I didn't know the value of veridical perception. I didn't know the value of getting my medical records and all of that, and that these things matter. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I think researchers also give us a language, veridical perception, that we didn't have before. And it's not
Yeah.
that we add on to our story, it's just we didn't have the research and the language for it, really.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that because I do I haven't heard about it so much lately, but I don't know if it's just because people aren't verbalizing it, but there used to be sort of a tension between experiencers and researchers, and like you, I always saw our relationship to be mutually beneficial. That, I can still remember another interview I did with a gal, a near-death experiencer, and we were just chatting supposedly after the formal interview, and I just commented, I noticed you're not wearing a watch, and she said, yeah, she said, I can't keep a watch, the battery dies. And so then I started asking her, was this the case before your near-death experience? And she's like, no. And she said, it's been happening since then. And she said, and other weird stuff happens. And I said, well, there is this electromagnetic after effects thing. And she's like, what? And then she said, my she and her boyfriend lived together. They just bought a new TV. And he had just complained the night before that whenever she walks in the room, nobody's touching the remote. The volume goes up and down, it switches channels, it turns off. And he said, it's only when you're in the room, so get out of here. And she's like, this explains so much. So like you said, I really think that we can be helpful to each other, that there are things that research has discovered that help NDEers make more sense of what they're experiencing. And
I'm
yeah,
so glad you brought up the technological thing because when my emotions are high, I have more of an effect on technology. And so I
yeah,
was excited about this interview. The volume didn't work when we first started. Now it's working.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
there's little things, but there's a really dramatic story. I have two dramatic stories with technological things. I'm afraid in cars because of my near-death experience. I cannot drive a Prius. I will kill a Prius battery. So during an ice storm, I slid on the road and my Prius battery went and it just
oh
died. And I
no,
was just on the side of the road without a working car. Luckily, a student came along and gave me a ride home. And she was like, "Oh, I lived in, Minnesota. I'm good with this." And she had a big truck.
wow,
But
wow,
so electrical cars or hybrid cars are difficult, for me.
that's
I know.
interesting.
And the other weird one, and I wish I could duplicate it and have it on camera, but I told a group of students that I have an effect on technology, and we had one particular room with a lot of computers, and I said, in fact, I'm in quite a mood today, and I pointed at the screen, and the screen went into this circle, started spinning around, and I think the students thought that I was like a witch or something, but they were really respectful after that. The college, the college gutted that room because other professors kept saying, something's wrong with this room. The computer never works right. They took the whole room apart and put a whole new set of computers and equipment in there. And I was like, oh, that was me.
I'm guessing you didn't share that story when you were interviewing for your new job. Did you?
No. No, in fact, I bought my own computers. I'm going to try to use my work computer very little. And it is an expense, like all these expenses, near-death experiencers
Yes.
never thought they'd have to buy 5 laptops a year, you know?
Right, right, right. Cell phones and computers and yeah, wow. Oh, that's really
But I
something.
can give the tip that grounding helps. You know, if your emotions are high, that has
Yes,
an effect on it. So going outside, grounding, breathing, all of that does help.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
sending light to your technology and love.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Well, there was a an IANDS presentation some years ago of a physician who she did research, and her colleagues noticed that whenever she came into this one room that had a lot of technology in it, it would go kaflooey. And so they thought that it had something to do with static. So they put an anti-static mat outside the door, and before she could come in the room, she had to stand on the anti-static mat for 5 minutes. Well, I think that what happened there didn't have anything to do with static. She was just sitting there, standing there, getting centered so that when she walked into the room, she wasn't bringing in whatever emotional stuff, had just been happening. But you couldn't probably convince those researchers of that. But yeah, that's one of the things we know is that emotional arousal exacerbates the electromagnetic stuff, and you're just a living example of it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your great stories, your research, your service to IANS, your presidency there, and yeah, just thank
Yeah,
you for being a support to me as well. I've appreciated it.
you bet. My pleasure, Tricia.
Have a good one.
You
Bye.
too.